Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everybody jumping in. And welcome back. I see a few people in the audience who were at the Identiverse conference last week. I hope you had just as much fun as I did. Appreciate you taking the time to come in, watch the latest in our ABAC Mastery course. Just before we jump into today's, this is obviously the 8th session. We've had 7 great sessions leading up to this. And you'll probably notice a bit of a trend in here is the fact that really what we're trying to do is look at how authorization can be made simpler, easier, not just setting it up, but how can we make your lives easier moving forward to maintain your access controls. Today, however, is probably one of the biggest and most exciting sessions. I'm going to be joined by not just for a big topic, but a big panel of people where we're going to be talking about eShare and how Axiomatics can improve the life of sharing information confidently within your business and even outside your business. I'm joined today with Mark Cassetta, somebody I've worked with for about 10 years. Mark, I will hand it over to you for the next slide.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Matt. We also have our friends from NTT Federal, Paul Yu, joining us, which is great as well. So I think this is one of those I'd say fun webinars where we're going to talk not just about kind of a solution. We're going to do some demos, and we're going to have somebody talk about what their experience was like, sort of bringing this all together in sort of a real life scenario. So yeah, thanks, Matt, and thank you to the Axiomatics team for having us. As Matt pointed out, we're going to talk about secure collaboration and how we can leverage ABAC for unstructured data. But before we get into the specifics of I'd say how we do this and what it looks like in real life, let's talk about why this is so important. And where this stems from is really looking back at the last couple of decades of how we as an industry have tried to address governance in organizations. And the reality is, from a technology standpoint, the technology, I'd say the integrations, the technology, the foundational elements of a solution to really kind of solve this problem just weren't available. And that often led people down the path of what we call governance barriers. And we put these governance barriers up in the organization. They'd often create frustration for users. So as much as we need to both simultaneously collaborate and get information, to and from people within the organization as well as outside the organization, governance and compliance, of course, is central to all this, to protecting our data, and often it would create frustration. What happens when we put a barrier in front of our knowledge workers? Well, we end up in a place where they find ways around those barriers, and they turn to things like shadow sharing, and often those approaches are less secure. They're certainly more expensive down the road when it comes to the need to try to manage all these different processes, and it often is just, from a collaboration standpoint, just less efficient. So the way that we like to think about this, and really I'd say is the spirit of the partnership that we've got with Axiomatics, is we don't want to put barriers in front of our users and in front of our knowledge workers as they're sharing documents, files, and emails. We want to deliver what we call trusted collaboration bridges. We want to give them guardrails as they are trying to share in these sensitive scenarios, and do it in a way that's safe. So we don't want to prevent them from doing their job. We want to enable them, but enable them to do it safely with the right guardrails and checks in place. What's ironic about delivering on trusted collaboration is it's actually delivered through a zero trust strategy and through the principles of zero trust. In order to put these barriers, put these guardrails in place, what we need to do is we need to ensure only the minimum amount of access is provided to enable collaboration. In some instances, it's okay for everybody in the organization, and maybe even outside the organization, to have access to certain information. But there's other scenarios when there's only a particular group of named users that you may want to have access to this data, and that's, again, a bit less permissive and a little bit better. But oftentimes, as we look at organizations that I would say any Global 2000 organization today, or anybody sort of in federal or government or military, there are often scenarios where you have to ensure that the right context and the right attributes of a user are in place for them to be able to access that data. Just because they had access to the information today does not necessarily mean they should be allowed to have access to that information tomorrow. And to deliver on this and to deliver on these principles of zero trust for data, it really comes down to enabling what really the industry has talked about for many years, is a data-centric security strategy. We need to be able to identify what data we need to protect, right, based on perhaps the sensitivity, have context about that data, about the users, about that moment in time to make a decision from a policy standpoint. And then we got to make sure that the people who are accessing that data are in fact the right people. And data-centric security isn't just about a foundation for unstructured data, but it's also a foundation for structured data. And so whether you're, as an organization, looking at solving this for structured or unstructured data, it applies in both scenarios. Now today, we're going to focus on unstructured data and really how eShare and Axiomatics have kind of brought data-centric security to life in that context. And from a technology ecosystem standpoint, there's a number of sort of pieces that come together here, as you'll see in the demo. So the first is, organizations have been embracing labeling, as we know, for many years, but I'd say there's been a pretty massive acceleration over the last 3 or 4 years, and Microsoft Purview's certainly at the center of that. And labels can go a long way to helping to identify the context of the data. Are they mandatory to bring this to life? Not necessarily. There's other ways you could get to it, but certainly labels do help. And it's not just, you don't necessarily have to just use labels at a file level or at an email level. You can leverage labels at a folder or at a repository or at a container level. Then, of course, there's a need to enforce policy, and that's where eShare comes in, be it at the time of sharing or at the time of access. And then there's this need to bring signals to the equation, right? Bring that context to the equation, and that's where Axiomatics plays a vital role. And then from a tracking and reporting perspective, eShare, as we'll talk about, can provide sort of a level of tracking and analytics that gives you insights into who, what, when, where, and why data has been accessed. And of course, all this data and all these activities and audit events that are taking place can all be forwarded to your SIM, to a Splunk, to whatever it might be, to help ensure that you've got the right audit logs for compliance and attestation.
So Mark, if I may, right there, I think that's
Yeah.
one area that a lot of our customers often overlook is those logs. There are virtually a treasure trove of information, right? You can see activity that you may not have seen before, and you can also use that to identify if you're under attack, right? If you see a spike in deny requests, you can take a look at that. Or you can even see the effectiveness of a marketing campaign, for example, right? Are you driving more people? And you can learn people's behaviors better.
Yeah, great point, Mark. And I think it's those real-time alerts and the ability to sort of drive some automation on top of that data that is sort of a level, if we think of kind of a crawl, walk, run, I'd say kind of falls into that walk category. But you need the foundation of the data in place for you to get to that point where you can drive those alerts and those real-time activities. But yeah, great insights and great point. Now, I think, as we look at those different technologies, the key to this strategy and the key to this partnership really comes in the form of context. And that's where Axiomatics plays a very strong role. When we think of what we need to do to enforce policy, obviously the Microsoft ecosystem's got a lot of different context within Microsoft 365, and Purview provides information at a label level, can provide information about file activity, sensitive information types. That's all great and wonderful. But in big enterprises, the reality is the context exists often outside of your Microsoft 365 ecosystem. It might be based on identity signals. Could be based on the user, the role, their organization. Could be based on specific enterprise signals, right? Certain applications, perhaps could be homegrown applications, could be homegrown databases, could be COTS applications, whatever it might be. These signals are all critical to sort of coming into place to making that real-time decision about who can access what information, where and when. And of course, and so eShare kind of helps bring all of that to life from a policy standpoint. one of the, what's interesting is when we think of zero trust, when we think of data-centric security, I mean, as Matt mentioned, we've been working together for, I guess, 10 years now, and that goes back to a company called Titus. And in many respects, this was a conversation we were having in 2012, right? Is how do you the constructs of zero trust, it certainly started at sort of the network level, right? And then started to work its way in as we started to think about applications and identity, and data was always there, but there was just, I'd say, some low-hanging fruit that had to get done before we really got to the data level. And there was a lot of pieces. There was, from a technology standpoint, there just wasn't pieces of the puzzle in place to make that happen. But over the last 4 or 5 years, with Microsoft 365 becoming the standard at enterprises, there is now an opportunity to combine link-based sharing with context and make zero trust for data a reality. If we think of Microsoft 365 as the container for that data, whether it be in a commercial site or a GCC high cloud or sovereign cloud or whatever it might be, that in of itself, if you can keep that data in your control and at the same time enable link-based sharing, you now have a place where you can maintain full control of that data at all times. The challenge is with, I'd say, a traditional model where effectively you give data away, whether that be through guest access or third-party file share, or even just email attachments, is at the moment that you share a file, that data leaves your organization. You have no way of knowing who's accessing that data, where they're at, and whether or not, and there's no way of you revoking that data at the same time. And so from a partnership perspective, labels, signals, policy enforcement all come to life as we look to enable link-based sharing from Microsoft 365. And when we do this, we can then provide a level of attestation and analytics that allow you to understand who, what, when, where, and how data is accessed. So that's kind of at a solution or a reference architecture level. What I'm going to do now is actually step into showing you this live and showing a couple of demos. Before I do that, I'll just step through kind of what the workflow is here for both external and internal collaboration, what some of the key pieces of the puzzle are to bring this to life. So the first thing is, when it comes to removing barriers and applying guardrails, we don't ever want to have to take our users out of the flow of work. We don't want to ever have to force them to context switch, right? And so when we think of some of those traditional barriers we've put in front of users, be it third-party file systems is a great example. Download the file, go put it into a third-party file system, share based on the policies in that system, which are separate from the policies in your Microsoft 365 system. That forces users to duplicate data, to leave their flow of work, and that's just frustrating. What we want to do is enable people to share natively from Microsoft 365. As they go to share, we also want to ensure the organization can maintain a closed tenant. One of the big challenges that have sort of evolved over the last 5 years as organizations have adopted Microsoft 365 is they start using guest access, and there might be a need for guest access under certain circumstances, but we've seen scenarios where people have got thousands upon thousands upon thousands of external identities that they aren't managing, right? They're just provisioning. They're effectively poking holes into the SharePoint tenant, providing access to information. As we enter this world where protecting our data is of course more important than ever before, allowing an organization to maintain a closed tenant is central to that entire strategy, which of course is something we do here. The third thing, which might sound obvious saying based on how I'd set this up, but we want to ensure that data never has to leave your Microsoft 365 tenant. We want to share links at all times. That's the goal. We want to make sure that data stays in your control, so that if you want to revoke that link, you can do that. Now, there are instances where, as you're going to share outside the organization, perhaps somebody has to download the file, or you think they have to download the file. A bit of an interesting stat from our side. When external users are given the option to download files, in more than 90% of the instances, they don't. So what that means is, even though download is available, if you provide a great user experience, if you enable the collaboration to take place within with the tools, and I'd say as much of an equitable experience as you can, people don't need to download the files, and therefore it stays in your control.
This is oh, sorry, Mark. I'll let you finish your thought, and then I'll jump in.
No, I was just going to say, Matt, and that leads to the fourth key item in all this, is that we want to provide security with all the controls they ever would need to provide to deploy a least privilege strategy, right? In some instances, maybe you want to provide people the option to download, but in other instances you don't, right? And you want to give people the option to dial in those permissions and dial in those controls. And of course, from a security standpoint, this is critical. So sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, you to me, you've nailed it, right? This what drives me absolutely up the wall is, when you're collaborating with somebody on a file, when you're working on your own files, it's fine, but as soon as you start collaborating, the number of replicated files, you end up with this version 1.1, version 1.2, the people that are trying to find some kind of clever way to version the document. But at the end of the day, you start searching your network drives and you've got 10 different copies of the same exact file. You start wondering which one's the right one, which ones do we start to purge. It's a mess. So if everybody is collaborating on that same document, it makes everything so much easier. So I loved that point, and I wanted to hammer it home.
Yeah, it's central to the entire strategy, and in fact, I think is going to be the first demo we're going to show. So there's two demos I'm going to show you here in a second. So first, we're going to show an external collaboration scenario. And that's where we're working in our Microsoft 365 tenant, and I've got a share file outside the organization, and I got to make sure we're doing that securely. I've got the right guardrails in place. And then the second is an internal collaboration scenario. As much as we think about guardrails for sharing outside the organization, in these, in our enterprises today, we know from a regulation standpoint, especially global enterprises, that there's as many guardrails required when we're sharing internally. And so I'll show you what an example of what that could look like. We've got our user, and we are in an organization called Aerospace Rocks, and we are working on a project called To the Moon. This project's got a number of key elements to it. Right, we're really excited about this. We're working on a marketing presentation with an agency. We want to put a lot of great branding about this, get people excited about sort of the next generation of space. At the same time, we've got a lot of sensitive information, a lot of data that we have to we got to keep in our control, and it actually falls under regulations such as and standards such as CUI. And in those scenarios, there's actually there's some important attributes that we've got to think about when it comes to sharing. So one is, there may be scenarios where I can only share a document with somebody if they have what's called a license or an export license to see that information. Right now, me as Mark at Aerospace Rocks, I have no idea who has those licenses or not. The second scenario is, this is a project that's being kind of driven out of the US, and there's scenarios where there's only US people can access this information. And so once again, I don't know who's a US person or not. I'm just going about doing my day, and I just need some guardrails to help me. Right. So we'll go through all of this. Now we're going to start with a pretty normal, I'll say, external collaboration situation. I've got a file here that's labeled as confidential. I've got my moon landing marketing presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and I want to share this. And the first option that you'll see here that's made available to me is to create an external share. And this is where eShare steps in from a policy standpoint. And I'm going to create this external share with my marketing agency, and my agency is is with Anthony External. Here is the presentation, and you can see that the sharing policy has been selected for me, has automatically been selected. It's based on the label of the file. Now, we could offer different drop downs and different types of policies based on what people are, based on, again, the permissiveness that the organization wants to take. And we'll see how that changes as the files change. But in this case, I'm just showing you kind of more of it, say a happy path flow. Now, I've gone ahead, I've created this share. What's interesting, before we go to that, I will go to my friend Anthony here. Give it a second. There we go. Anthony's, I'm this marketing agency. I'm not, I'm using Google. I don't have a Microsoft identity. But this is pretty sensitive data. But I see that this has come from Mark at Aerospace Rocks. And here's the presentation about the moon landing. So I'm going to click on my trusted share. And the first option that's given to me is actually log in with my Google ID. Right? I can authenticate with Google. Right? I don't have to go create a Microsoft ID. I don't have to, and of course, how the external person authenticates is entirely up to the organization. But in this case, we've enabled it through OpenID. There's actually some terms of use that have come up here. This is all configurable. You don't have to have terms of use, but certainly, we've got a pretty sensitive presentation. We want to make sure that that the person accepts terms of use. In fact, I want to make sure they accept terms of use even as they go to open that document. Again, that's all configurable. Now, what's key to all of this is, as this person, and to Matt's point earlier, as I'm opening up this presentation, assuming Microsoft doesn't fail me today, there we go. As I go to open this presentation, we will see that this is actually all editable from PowerPoint. Right? This is a PowerPoint experience. I can edit in the browser. I can do, of course, we know that the browser-based tools maybe aren't as in depth as the desktop tools, but when it comes to external collaboration, people aren't often building presentations, with the external person in flight. They're making changes, they're updating text, and this goes back to that 90% metric that we mentioned, which was, people don't have to download the file. Right? All this collaboration can take place here. And so these are sort of the pieces of the puzzle that enable the data to stay in your control. All right. So that's a quick view of I'd say kind of a happy path external collaboration scenario. Now, as I said, though, there are situations and there is data when that external person is not allowed to have access to information, and this is where all of a sudden we can bring more attributes into play. So I've got this communication infrastructure now. I might be thinking communication like marketing communications and thinking, okay, I can share this with I'm going to share this with this agency that I'm working with, this marketing agency. And I go ahead, I'm going to share it with Anthony External. And immediately there's some information here. It's saying this isn't going to work. Well, why isn't this going to work? Well, there's no export license for this recipient. This export license is not in Microsoft 365. This export license is sitting outside of Microsoft 365. This is an attribute, right, that is sitting in the organization that Axiomatics is going out and fetching about this individual. There may be external folks that do have an export license that are allowed to see this information, but in this case, Anthony doesn't, and therefore he's not allowed to get access to this file. And I'd say that guardrail, if you will, has been put in place. Because in the event that this person did get it and didn't have a license, there's a significant violation that gets put in place. And this organization obviously wants to make sure that we're maintaining our compliance and protecting the sensitive data. So this is the exact point where we see a wonderful intersection with ABAC and with Axiomatics.
So Mark, if I may, right there, because
yeah.
I mean, obviously that's where, like I say, in our opinion, that's where a lot of the magic comes in. But
yeah,
again, like you mentioned, when you share someone, they don't have to have an account in the Microsoft environment. Mm-hmm. Same thing here with the authorization. You can have employees say in Entra ID, but your partners, maybe they're in a database in AWS, and or maybe they're
right.
registered in Google, wherever they are. The Axiomatics server can go reach out to your source of truth and find out, hey, who are they? And if you have an internal partner database, we can see things like what company they work for, what's their citizenship, what's the expiration date of the export control license. Basically, the possibilities are endless to the complexity of the authorization you can add in this situation by letting eShare, offload that authorization from Microsoft.
Yeah, great point, Mark. And what's fascinating about this partnership and this use case is, a lot of the principles that we're applying here are a lot of the things that I know ABAC and Axiomatics have solved on the structured world for many years, right? And in fact, when we think of the policies that you've had to serve for big applications and organizations, I mean, the rules and the attributes are very in depth, right? And so, just I think the power that's behind the scenes here is quite immense. And to your point, you know, this that's where the magic happens. And the idea is, you know, simple is very hard to do. Presenting something that's simple for somebody to be able to just to be able to use is often hard to do. So as much as this may have seemed just like one click, there's a lot of great things that are happening behind the scenes to make that happen. Okay. So that's an example of our first demo where we were talking about external collaboration. I showed you kind of the branded web portal and how, you know, assuming the person gets access and all the right permissions and policies are in place, that external recipient can go in, they can collaborate. They don't have to leave the portal. They don't have to download. All is wonderful. Now, the other scenario, though, is, like I said, there's also internal collaboration situations. And on the internal collaboration side, where do we often collaborate? We often collaborate in Outlook, and there are, just going back to there we go. There are, there's other places we can collaborate. There's other places we can apply policy, right? We can take these same constructs and apply them to SharePoint sites, and when we add members to those SharePoint sites, we can evaluate attributes about those members. But I'm going to show kind of, I think, a flow that everybody would be familiar with, which is I'm going to send this document to Alan and John, and Alan and John are both in my organization. And I've got Project to the Moon, and I know this is sensitive data. I know I can't send it outside the organization, but I'm going to send it to them, and I want to work with them on updating it. And I just told them about it, so I want to bring them into the loop. So I'm going to click send. Excuse me. And very quickly, we can see that all of a sudden I'm met with some information about John. And John's not a US person, and therefore John is not allowed to get access to this file. I didn't really realize that as a user. I don't know the behind the scenes compliance. I mean, there's, as we know, information security and policy within an organization. Oh, did I freeze?
While you're unfreezing there, I will say.
There we go.
There you go. I will say, I want to say something about that reason that's there. That is something that is optional. Obviously, you want to provide a good experience for your customers, but you don't want to leak too much information. So that's something else that is configurable. And that reason is coming from the Axiomatics policy. So you as a customer do have control over what you want to what you want to have shown there. Yeah,
great point, Mark. And I think my computer just had a I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I appreciate you jumping in there. It's a really good point. And I suspect, in this case, it's a pretty raw reason just for the sake of demo and to see kind of what, to sort of see what, why this person isn't allowed to receive this information. But yeah, it's all completely configurable. So if I click send, then John is removed. And we can see that only Alan has received access to this document. So, and by the way, we could apply this exact same logic in email. If I wanted to share a file outside the organization to Anthony external, I could, the exact same constructs of policy could be put in place. In fact, what eShare will do is if you take a link, we'll convert that link to a trusted share. The file stays in the exact same location that it was, but the person's accessing the link to that file through a trusted share, through that portal that I showed you. If it was an email attachment, a physical attachment, we'll actually take that attachment and flip it back into your Microsoft 365 tenant. So once again, the data is staying in that container in Microsoft 365, and really it's all about sharing links and applying policy there. So with that, that's kind of, I'd say, the demo side of it, the solution side, but probably a good time to talk a little bit about somebody that's been doing this in real life. And so we got Tim and Paul from NTT Data, and they put a quick summary here together of sort of the experience that they've had working with both Axiomatics and eShare. But Tim, maybe I'll hand it over to you, and you can give us a quick overview. Or Paul.
Tim, you need to unmute.
Oh,
So hi everybody, I'm Paul Yu. I oversaw this overall implementation of this project. NTT Data Federal has been partnering with Axiomatics for maybe a decade now, and we just started working with eShare this past year, and it's been a great experience for us. And Tim is the project manager of this project. I mean, we believe in it so much that our management team chose to actually sort of drink our own champagne, if you will, to implement Axiomatics and eShare within our organization for real use. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Tim real quick.
I think Tim has been struggling with his mute button.
Okay.
I think it keeps auto muting him.
Okay, I will try to do the presentation then. Okay, so the technical problem that we were trying to solve was that, as Mark was talking about, we actually had to duplicate, in order to share information from our organization, either with our parent organization or with our partners, we actually had to duplicate the information out from our own internal SharePoint into a external SharePoint that other people could access. And as Mark indicated, that was a very, very painful exercise, and potential spillage and proper replication is very, very painful and time consuming. So what we wanted to do, as eShare is talking about, is keep all of our information within our actually GCC High Office 365 with fine-grained access control from Axiomatics ABAC ADS server, and then be able to share externally using eShare. So what we have seen so far is exactly what Mark have talked about, is that we, along with our own automation using Power Apps and Power Automate, have been able to improve the overall processes and the sharing of information by leveraging eShare and Axiomatics. And I want to say that we've actually, obviously every implementation has unique requirements, and we encounter some of these unique requirements, and we shared it with the team, both Axiomatics and eShare, and both teams worked hand in hand really, really well, and was able to deliver the new solutions within a very timely fashion. And as an integrator, that is a tremendous thing to have your product partners be able to upgrade their product line in order to help us achieve the desired outcome. Okay. Next slide.
Awesome. I actually, Paul, it was just a one slide
okay.
summary.
Right.
No stress. So, you're good.
Okay. So yeah, I just Tim ran the day-to-day project, and he has set up a weekly Scrum meeting with eShare and Axiomatics, and it was tremendous. Both teams attended those meetings with us, and really kept a very positive cadence, and it was great. So look forward to helping you guys in the audience, and continuing working with Axiomatics and eShare. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Paul and Tim, it's always great to be able to work with you guys, obviously. One question that I always get is around the implementation, whether it's Axiomatics alone, whether it's Axiomatics with eShare. And one of those questions that always comes up is, how does the implementation actually look? What's the actual level of effort? How long does it take? Are you guys able to kind of go into sort of what this implementation looked like for NTT?
So I think overall, from the time we started coding to now, it's roughly 6 months or so, I think. But I would say a lot of that was we had to prep our environment first, and then there were product upgrades that we had to implement. So the overall 6 months, I mean, the eShare implementation was, we stood it up, we installed the agents and so forth. Basically, that was working. Axiomatics, we had to stand up ADS and then verify all the connections and so forth. And we were not, prior to this project, my team was not Power App, Power Automate engineers, so we had to learn how to do that. And so once you get the pieces and having a knowledgeable partner like ourselves, that's actually gone through the whole exercise. We've done the ADS implementation quite a bit. This is our first eShare implementation, and then also having the two products work together. I think Tim and the team really understand how all that stuff works. And in the sharing process of learning what your organization's requirements are, and then also the finding the sources of truth for the corporate data, right? So we actually had to create a local database and then also be able to talk to our Salesforce system and so forth. So overall, the project has taken 6 months, but not all of that is just setting up the environment. That setting up the environment was pretty fast and painless, but it's really the rest of the implementation that has taken the time, I would say.
Yeah. No, it is amazing again having NTT, not just for, as you say, drinking your own champagne, but being able to replicate this down the road as well, not just for further implementations within NTT, but obviously with other customers. We touched on sort of the benefits, from a security, from a collaboration side of things. From an NTT side, any other areas that you'd want to focus in on, whether it's has this opened up any time savings, cost savings?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Matt. So as I said, we had two separate Office 365 instances. Originally, we were thinking that there was going to be a significant savings in the cost of the subscription, but it turns out we have a preferential contract with Microsoft or something. So that was not the savings. But what you guys were talking about in terms of the manual efforts to duplicate the files and making sure that there's not widespread usage, spreading of those files, and you losing track of the material. With this implementation, it will provide much better security and reduce the effort associated with management of duplicate files and so forth, right? And the replication of all that stuff to our partners and so forth.
And Paul, I assume you're on GCC today, so I don't believe Copilot's there at the moment, but it will someday. And as we think of kind of this AI era that we are all entering, that besides the securing of that data, just general governance, speaks to the need for that data to maintain that single source of truth, right? So what you and Matt are saying of, data duplication, that is there's, of course, we've been talking about securing of data here, but I'd say one of a great outcome is you're actually putting yourself in a good place to be AI ready when that time comes, right? When that's available. I don't know if do you agree?
Absolutely. And NTT Data likes to say now that we are AI first. I think doing this implementation, once you have the solution for unstructured data, SharePoint sharing with external partners and so forth, and you have Axiomatics installed, then because I actually started with Axiomatics in the structured data world, right? And I think there's actually a tremendous process of being able to apply these externalized access control logic to fine-grain to structure applications and also for controlling access by the AI bots and the AI agents, so that there's not spillage of information on through the large language models that you create from your own sources of information, right? Because if you let's say in a secure world where you have top secret or proprietary knowledge that you don't want to share with your AI agent, if you just left that out there and allowed you trained your large models with unrestricted data, then when people prompt, the potential spillage of information will happen. Whereas if you're able to have that agent respect the external policies and so forth, then the potential is that you could restrict those language models from knowing the proprietary information and won't spill inadvertently to the public.
Great point, Paul.
Mark, just kind of going back to the eShare side of things. One of the questions that came up, and I know you touched on it earlier, but the question was we were looking at SharePoint and email. Is there anywhere else that eShare works with?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're across the Microsoft ecosystem. We actually have a Microsoft 365 app. We're native within Teams. There's all sorts of different, I'll say, egress points that we coalesce and show up. Our goal is to kind of be as much in the flow of work as possible. All right. So I showed you kind of a file handler. We also have an app for SharePoint as well. So we try to kind of show up as much as we possibly can in those flows of work. And then, I'll say it from an obvious, it might be obvious in that description, but I'll just say it. And of course, this extends all across mobile and any kind of device for that matter, right? So be it through the app, or be it if you wanted to access eShare just through the browser, you could do that. So we're as ubiquitous as you could be throughout the 365 ecosystem.
So you work where the user works, basically.
That's the goal. Exactly. Well said.
Nice. A question over to you, Mark Berg. This one hasn't been asked from the panel, but kind of a follow-up to Mark Cassetta's point. The policies that we were looking at. So there's obviously in the scenarios, the demos that Mark showed, it was really focused in on the training, the levels of security that a user might have to receive sensitive information. What's the customization look like? How flexible is it to have different policies, different apps, the same policies for different apps? What does that customization look like?
Well, how much time do we have? I'll say in terms of, I wouldn't use the word customization because it sounds like we're doing a lot of work. I'd use the word flexibility. So the policies are very flexible. Like we have a rich policy language. You can express virtually any authorization requirement you have. It's not just about export control licenses, like you said. It could be, hey, if someone have a training class, right? Has been trained to handle this type of information. So typically what we find is you'll write policies and they'll apply to different types of data. And we can definitely structure policies so you can write that rule or policy once and reuse it across multiple different types of data, or if you're coming in from a different application, which eShare also provides us, or what action you're doing, right? Is someone trying to share something or is someone trying to create something, right? There could be different rules applied to those actions. So I wouldn't use complexity. I'd say we're flexible enough and strong enough to handle very complex authorization requirements.
Well said. So something you said earlier that I'll circle back on as well. It's not just the ability to have that fine-grained access control, and it's not just about being able to handle that secure sharing. Another element is really that logging and reporting aspect. So not only are you able to control what the users are able to do, and I shouldn't even say control, but it's the idea of enabling the users to be more and more effective at their job while safely securing information. But it's that reporting and analysis side of it as well. So you're able to get a better purview into what the users are doing, not just in one application, but in every single application that they're touching that's tied to Axiomatics. And you're able to cross-reference that information, which becomes really valuable. I'm actually going to flip the script. Paul, there's another question to you, sir. As far as the implementation from an NTT side, any lessons learned? Anything you'd want to share with the audience?
That actually would have been better for Tim.
Okay.
But I think probably the thing is, because we have been working with Axiomatics for so long and we understand the externalized access control, having somebody with that knowledge on your team on this journey would be really, really helpful, right? It's not like it takes forever, but just being able to, we had Mark help us before and so forth. It was just makes life a lot easier, because eShare, in terms of getting their proxies up and running, was pretty easy for us, very easy for our IT team and everything. But the being able to get the overall architecture and then understand how to set up the sources of truth and writing the ABAC policies, the alpha policies, and so forth. It's really, really helpful, I think. So that would be my lessons learned from this. So,
yeah, you guys have been.
Well,
oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead, Matt.
Sure. All I was going to say is, yeah, we've obviously been working together for a number of years. You guys are well versed in Axiomatics, which obviously goes a long way. It is very different, taking a more legacy approach to writing policies with roles, and upgrading your thinking, upgrading your policies to using attributes and policies instead of a real role.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with externalized access control, right, is developers, traditional IT developers, right? That's a very different set of people than SharePoint administrators and so forth. Traditional application developers understand attribute-based access control. It's just that all of those attributes are in line in their legacy application. So getting them to think about extracting those if then else logic out of their existing applications to create externalized policies, that's the tough part with those people. But with SharePoint administrators, they may not be down at that level traditionally. So I think that's where the sort of the blending between the two sides needs to happen. And I think my team, which all started off as traditional application developers, which we retrained ourselves to think about ADS and alpha policies and how to make policy as code. That helps a lot. And then when eShare came along, makes the we weren't SharePoint experts, so we had to bring in our IT team to help us manage all of that. And I think another lesson is having a good super user, if you will, is really helpful. We have one of those on our team, and she was able to do user acceptance testing with us, or user testing with us, that makes identifying potential problems much earlier, much sooner than us trying to muck around with it ourselves. So,
I think, Paul, one of the things you said there is, at a macro level, something that I think I've been seeing as I've been talking to just a lot of different organizations. And even though we kind of come at it perhaps from a unstructured data side, effectively there's a convergence that we're seeing organizations make with all these different teams, right? And as much as IAM may have been a silo for the last couple of decades, and then you got security and governance, and you have digital workplace. If you think of, and I don't want to be too headliney here, but the reality is, if you think of kind of this AI era that is happening and coming upon us, these groups have to get closer and closer together, right? You just can't be siloed anymore. And I think so to your point, these folks who have lived and breathed perhaps authorization or externalized authorization on the structured data side, that's going to be converging with unstructured data. It already has, right? This is case in point. So it's perhaps less about trying to hire somebody for the team, but think of it more as these groups how do we bring these groups together to work and collaborate on this joint effort?
Yeah, I think every one of our traditional silos or swim lanes, if you will, right? As you're saying, is starting to blend together. And for me, when I saw externalized access control the first time many years ago now, I was thinking that this is the long-term future for everything, right? Because we have extrapolated out simple methods, large frameworks from all of that used to be embedded inside of applications before, right? And algorithms or whatever, we pull that out into libraries, complex ORMs, whatever. We create frameworks to make it simpler for the application developer. Whereas this ADS with alpha policy, corporate-wide policies could be distilled down to a very manageable set of policies, and then that externalized framework, and then could be reused by the unstructured side or the structured side. And that type of access control and the sources of truth, right, of the attributes, it is the future. But it's very difficult to get IT or the application developers to do externalized access control. But if you could get eShare, Axiomatics into your organization, that could be the beginnings of getting some structured data applications to ride on top of ADS and demonstrate the value of this convergence that you're talking about, Mark.
Yeah, awesome point, Paul.
All right, we've got 8 minutes. I was gonna ask for everybody's final comments. Paul, I think your last one about the number of policies can be distilled down from a lot to a few is such a great story. I think one of my favorite success stories from a customer was, they had about 100,000 different roles and policies that they were using before. And by moving into Axiomatics and more of a policy-based approach, they got it down to, instead of 100,000 rules, they got it down to about 150 rules. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it's very tough for people to understand the previous set of talking points about ABAC and so forth, right? The role explosion or so forth, all those other things that we talk about. But when you start looking at, so we modernize on our own research, right? We modernize a legacy application, 2 applications that we were doing the operation maintenance for from .NET ASP into ADS with Java. And I mean, it was lots and lots of code and lots of roles, and people were granting multiple roles so that they can move up and down the organizational hierarchy to have different authorization. And it's the same person would log in multiple times with different roles, right? Whereas with ADS, we were able to distill that down to, here's a person, this is what they do, and when they're trying to deal with this organization, as long as it's within their organizational structure, they can do whatever they need to do, whatever. So the policy shrunk down to a very small set of real policies and support both applications and so forth. So yeah, your other customers' experience is absolutely right on.
Awesome. Mr. Cassetta, you're one of those guys. You've been around a long time. You've been in all kinds of security. You've seen it all, done it all. From your side, what are your final thoughts? Any final words?
Yeah, I think what's exciting about where we are now from a technology standpoint is a lot of the vision that I believe the security and the data security industry has had since the very beginning can now come to life. And for a variety of reasons, there's been challenges in the past, but I think we can actually now truly balance both the need to be secure and comply without compromising on user experience and productivity. So I think it's an exciting time, and certainly this partnership between all three of our organizations, I believe, speaks strongly to that.
Completely agree. Very, very well said. Mark Berg, same question, sir. Any final
I mean, I think this is a great example of how an organization such as eShare, they obviously they still have security controls in their applications and platforms, but they've recognized that, hey, we don't need to cater to every complex use case there is. We can offload that to a third-party authorization vendor and then let the customer decide what your policies are and let them manage it. So it's like a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the software vendor. It's a win for the customer. And I think this is a great example of, getting about as close as you can to an off-the-shelf customer customized unique authorization system. And this is where I think if more vendors do this and start offloading authorization, the world's going to become a better place. And since David Broussard is in here, I have to do a plug. This is what the Auth-Zen working group is actually working on to try to drive that exposure across the entire industry to get every application vendor to do what eShare is doing. So I think great. Thanks, Mark at eShare. This is, I think, a great step forward for everybody. We just need more people to do it.
That's amazing.
If I may, one last thing, maybe Mark's comment jogged my mind, right? That the flexibility of this externalized authorization system really comes into play. In our instance, we had multiple mergers during this project, and we had organizations that actually had international personnel within the same organization. And so we just had to add the foreign national attribute to our policies. And all of a sudden, the same governance stuff worked for all of these people that were foreign nationals that were not allowed to access anything else within our primary SharePoint system, right? So just change the one policy and that was it. So that's the type of flexibility that you just can't get from traditional role-based access control.
I love that, Paul. Make one policy change and everything just keeps working. If we would have been looking at that from a more legacy role-based approach, we would have been looking at not one policy change. We would have been looking at hours, if not days and weeks of effort from multiple people across multiple teams trying to make that work. That's
exactly.
That's a great way to end. I'm not even going to give my final thoughts. That was just too good. If you're interested in my final thoughts, reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always available. I always like talking about this stuff, and we can go from there. Mark, Paul, I have really enjoyed this session. Great to work with you guys as always. And if anybody does have questions, obviously feel free to reach out to any of us. It's an exciting topic. Microsoft is everywhere. Love them or hate them, you just can't get away from it. And secure sharing is always going to be a problem until you have a good solution like this. So reach out if you have questions. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your days. Bye now.